I want you to imagine a future where a worker falls 7 stories at a construction site. He lands feet first onto the bare concrete below. Smashed legs drive up and shatter his pelvis. Heart and lungs lacerated by fractured ribs. He's awake and he's dying. Within 8 minutes, an ambulance crew arrives on scene, staffed by 2 paramedics, both holding a bachelor's degree in paramedical science. They quickly place tourniquets on his shattered legs, gently roll him from the prone position he was found onto a pelvic binder and a scoop stretcher. They administer high-flow O2 and establish IV access. They make a decision not to give any clear fluids. They do administer some fentanyl. 11 minutes have passed since the fall, and a critical care paramedic arrives on scene. She has completed a master's degree in pre-hospital critical care medicine. She administers a small dose of ketamine and performs bilateral needle thoracentesis. Immediately after that, she begins laying out equipment for an RSI. It's been 14 minutes since his fall, and a specialized paramedic in a high acuity response unit, or HARU, arrives at scene. Already a critical care paramedic for many years, he's doing an additional master's in traumatology. He assesses the patient, including the use of ultrasound, which reveals blood not only in Morrison's pouch, but also within the pericardium. And he does a finger prick INR, which has a value of 1.6. The HARU paramedic makes a very quick phone call to a senior emergency physician who works for the ambulance service, and together they make a collaborative treatment plan. The patient receives 1 unit of warm pack red cells during the RSI kit dump and checklist. He is induced with a low dose of ketamine and a full dose of rocuronium. The patient is bagged during the induction phase. It's a first pass, grade 1, with no further desaturation and no further hypotension. As the critical care paramedic passes the tube through the cords, the HARU paramedic performs bilateral open finger thoracostomies, the left releasing a large amount of air, the right blood. Patient is rapidly transported to a level 1 trauma center, which is notified by the HARU paramedic. It's a 20-minute journey, and on the way in, the patient receives warmed extended life plasma, TXA, 4 amps of calcium, and due to his INR being greater than 1.5, fibrinogen concentrate. He is met by a multidisciplinary team in the ED, and within 13 minutes, the patient is in the operating theater. Just over an hour since the patient fell 7 stories. After 8 months, 300 odd blood transfusions, and some time in ECMO, David returns home to his family, neurologically intact. Now, to some in this room, this might sound futuristic or far-fetched. However, when I joined the Queensland Ambulance Service Gold Coast HARU in 2015, most of what I've said today already existed and was taking place commonly, and we've continued to improve since then. So the HARU is a 3rd clinical tier level in the Queensland Ambulance Service that complements the existing advanced care paramedics and critical care paramedics. Some of the inspiration came from the UK MERT team, and we have 2 cars which operate, 1 in Brisbane and 1 in the Gold Coast. This is the car, and as you can see, quite a few toys. However, I think the most important piece of equipment that we carry isn't in this photo, and that would be the work phone. The ability to notify a receiving facility of the injury burden of the patient and have the right personnel and equipment ready when we arrive is arguably one of the strongest reasons for HARU. 2 minutes on scene for a thorough assessment and a quick phone call can safely save 20 minutes downstream. When I was asked to do this talk at SMAC, I realized I wasn't the person to do it. And it should be my boss, Dr. Stephen Rashford, the medical director of the ambulance service, to be here today. He's really the founder and very much the leader of HARU. So I phoned Steve and I had a discussion. I said, Steve, I think you should do it. And he said, no, it's important you're there. Steve explained to me that a big part of the HARU program is for the development of paramedics. And I think this speaks volumes not only for the ethos of HARU program, but also the character of Steve Rashford. Approximately 25% of all HARU shifts are a double model of a HARU doctor and a HARU paramedic. And my feelings are that when I work with the right doctor, it makes me a better paramedic, and I hope the reverse is true as well. The magic happens when we support and learn from each other in cases we are unfamiliar or unexperienced with, not only for the patient directly in front of us, but for future patients as well. We have a very standardized assessment for blunt and penetrating trauma victims. However, it's the nuanced care that allows HARU to save lives that previously wouldn't have been saved in the pre-hospital field. And Steve often speaks about this. He speaks about the nuanced approach to care. A patient who has a stab wound to chest or abdomen and goes into cardiac arrest requires an urgent thoracotomy. That would be a CBA approach. The motorcyclist who slides off his Harley Davidson on the weekend into a stop sign and has a large flare segment, is bradycardic and hypoxic on arrival, requires an urgent finger thoracostomy, so a BAC approach. And the worker who has an angle grinder explode in his face and is bleeding out requires urgent intubation, facial packing, and some blood, so an ACB approach. We are seeing people survive who used to die in the back of ambulances. All of this is supported by a very rigorous audit process, with each case being reviewed 4 times. Once on the initial phone call from the scene, immediately thereafter after handover at hospital to make sure that all our assessments were correct, a very comprehensive electronic database which is reviewed by about 12 senior clinicians, and a very robust fortnightly audit. All of these things together have allowed us to have a first-pass success rate for intubation for HARU paramedics above 96%, and some very low mortality rates for major trauma. I'm very fortunate to work for such a progressive ambulance service, and very privileged today to be speaking to you all about this. Looking around the room and at lunch, I saw a lot of familiar faces from the FOAMed community, and it struck me that I wanted to say thank you, because a lot of good patient care has come out of that for patients I've had direct contact with. And I want to let the people in this audience know, and those eventually watching online, that your reach is further than you imagine, and I'm looking forward to going to the future with you and HARU. Thank you very much.
Gary, my friend. Gary's also from South Africa, just so that everyone knows, before we start with the interview. Right. Craig Wiley, SmackForce News. Right. Gary, you spoke to us about the patient that fell 7 stories, using ultrasound pre-hospitally. And we all know that EFAST is something that we do, and you explained to us how you found blood. What other modality or what other investigations can we do pre-hospitally, or are you currently doing pre-hospitally with ultrasound?
Sure. So we've grown up a bit. I think it's been maybe 7 or 8 years since the paramedics have been doing ultrasound in Queensland. And through our confidence in FAST, we've progressed. We use it in cardiac arrest patients to look for cardiac contractility. And we've had some amazing saves. We've had patients with a good story for pulmonary embolism. And we've arrived on scene and placed the probe in the subxiphoid view, and we've seen the dilated right ventricle. And in 2 cases, we've administered tenecteplase in that cardiac arrest, and both patients have had amazing neurological recoveries. I've also incidentally picked a AAA that ruptured, which we think caused the accident. So I think we're growing with it. I think very much using an ultrasound for FAST is like using an ECG defibrillator in AED mode. You're looking for a binary thing. So an AED would be VF, VTAC, and FAST is fluid or no fluid. However, the next evolution is, I think, might well be the incorporation of Scott Weingart's RUSH-E protocol, which is kind of like using the ultrasound as a 12-lead ECG. So all the things we can do with a 12-lead ECG, from looking at STEMI patterns to overdose, I think that's the next evolution. So we're moving forward.
Thank you. Then I just wanted to note to the audience that SmackForce News is formal news broadcasting, and we don't normally look at social media, but we have been seeing this thing coming out of Queensland that we're using products rather than whole blood, and we've been pushing whole blood a lot. So we would just want to know, and we heard in your talk that you're doing diagnostic testing pre-hospitally and not necessarily using whole blood again anymore.
Yeah, we haven't had whole blood. Okay. It's hard to access. Our Deputy Medical Director, Dan Bodner, is doing a fascinating trial, and I encourage you all to look at it, called Prophecy. So the prevalence of pre-hospital injury-induced coagulopathy. So the HARU paramedics on certain trauma patients are drawing tubes of blood pre-hospitally, looking at coagulation, ROTEM, FBC, and some of the early findings on it are guiding our nuanced trauma care. So we found, and I don't want to speak about Dan's research because he's the guru, but he's explained to me that they found a sweet spot with INR and low fibrinogen levels. So we use an INR marker of anything above 1.5 as our guide to give fibrinogen concentrate pre-hospitally. And a significant percentage of our patients who receive blood are hypocalcemic, so we're increasing our calcium dosages for 2 amps per bag of product use. So I think the idea that I spoke to Dan about is we're worried about the antigens that whole blood can introduce, and maybe this nuanced care, giving patients what they need, is the way to go.
Thank you, Gary. Craig Wiley, Smack Force News, signing out.